Is time real? This thought experiment uses the concept of a two-dimensional world and its inhabitants' experiences to shed light on how time might operate within a three-dimensional framework. I have imagined a two-dimensional world comprised of conscious, intelligent, two-dimensional beings unable to access the third dimension of space. As analogous to human beings, constrained within a three-dimensional existence and unable to directly access time, our proposed fourth dimension. By examining how two-dimensional beings conceptualize higher dimensions and perceive their reality, I aim to abstract lessons that might reveal underlying principles about time, a dimension humans perceive but do not fully understand. Observing a hypothetical two-dimensional world provides a simplified model for understanding how dimensional constraints affect perception. The two-dimensional being's inability to access the third dimension of space suggests that humans, similarly constrained within a three-dimensional spatial existence, might also experience limitations in perceiving or interacting with time. This analogy aims to question whether time is genuinely a fundamental dimension or merely a framework for organizing our experiences. Let's delve into it. In this two-dimensional world, intelligent, conscious beings exist on a flat plane, capable of only perceiving length and width, but not depth. These beings have no experience with the third dimension, meaning they can move left and right, forward and back, but cannot, quote-unquote, rise above or sink below their existential plane. Their interactions, observations, and spatial awareness are confined to two dimensions, though their cognitive abilities allow them to hypothesize higher dimensional realities. One of these beings, a two-dimensional thinker, intuitively senses that there could be something more, an abstract dimension which they call depth. While they cannot experience depth directly, this thinker notices spatial variations in their world that suggest their plane may be moving through stacked layers, albeit indirectly. The thinker develops a quote-unquote depth scale, represented in a cycle formed from 000 to 1200, similar to the cyclical nature of a clock. The two-dimensional thinker assigns a direction to depth, marking their plane as always moving upward. This scale loops infinitely and continuously, capturing depth as an abstract cycle without implying an actual traversable third dimension. To organize this movement, the two-dimensional thinker labels intervals in the cycle as UP for up and DN for down, creating a structure that reflects the direction they intuitively assign to their world's movement through depth. This UP and DN scale gives the two-dimensional beings a way to map their experiences within an abstract depth, but they never truly access or move within this dimension. The reality for their plane of existence is that depth is always at zero, regardless of how high they may, quote-unquote, feel they are. For them, depth remains a useful but ultimately unattainable concept, an idea they employ to describe spatial changes but never physically navigate. The concept of depth remains theoretical, abstract, a tool to navigate and explain their world within the limitations of their plane. Using the two-dimensional world as a reference allows us to draw several implications about how time might operate in our three-dimensional reality. Perceptual constraints. The two-dimensional beings are confined to their plane and only perceive depth through abstraction. By analogy, humans confined to three-dimensional existence may only indirectly perceive time and impose a structure on it to organize experience. Just as the two-dimensional being's depth scale is an abstract model, rather than a literal third dimension they can traverse, our experience of time may be more of a perceptual framework than an actual dimension we, quote-unquote, move through. Akin to the way depth is always at zero, time is also always at zero. This is merely a way of saying that the only thing that exists is the present moment, the now. The past is no longer with us and the future is yet to arrive. Time appears to be a perceptual framework to help organize our experiences. Abstract constructs. The two-dimensional beings UP and DN cycle, up and down, to represent depth parallels our concept of AM and PM to represent the passage of time. This structure helps them organize changes in the world without truly accessing a higher dimension. Similarly, our linear experience of time could be an abstraction shaped by our consciousness. This framework gives us a way to structure changes in sequences, but doesn't necessarily reflect a literal, traversable fourth dimension. Linear time and its limitations. For humans, perceiving time strictly linearly may drive advancement and urgency, but could also restrict our understanding of the universe on a fundamental level. Like the two-dimensional thinker who must abstract depth as a looping cycle, we might eventually reach a point where our linear model of time becomes limiting. To understand time's full nature, human civilization might need to adopt a broader or multidimensional framework, reflecting a more scalable approach, similar to what the two-dimensional beings would require for a deeper understanding of depth. Entropy and directionality. The two-dimensional thinker assigns a direction to depth, marking their plane as always moving upward. This is similar to how humans use entropy to assign a forward direction to time based on increasing disorder. The two-dimensional thinker's UP and DN cycle mirrors humanity's AM and PM framework, reflecting how both civilizations organize experiences by creating a directional cycle. This comparison suggests that our perception of time moving forward might be more of a cognitive adaptation to entropy and less an objective passage, similar to the two-dimensional being's abstraction of depth directionality. Existential implications for human perception. If time, like depth for the two-dimensional beings, is simply a model to interpret changes, then our perception of moving through time could be an inherent limitation of our dimensional understanding. We, like the two-dimensional creatures, might be using abstractions to explain observable changes when in truth, time may not be fundamental to reality. This analogy between a two-dimensional world and our three-dimensional experience suggests that time, as we perceive it, may be more abstract than absolute. Observing the constraints of the two-dimensional being's depth perception allows us to question the limitations of our temporal perception. Like the two-dimensional thinkers who attempt to understand a third dimension they cannot access, humans may only grasp time through indirect models that serve as practical constructs, rather than fundamental aspects of the universe. Like, share, and subscribe. In the next video in this series, I'll explore humanity's temporal framework as analogous to that of a hypothetical extraterrestrial civilization.